All right, today we're going to dive into a Nobel Prize-winning idea that honestly caused a massive rupture in how we think about economics. It completely challenges a belief that a lot of people thought was just an iron law of human nature. And it proves that when it comes to managing our shared world, there's more than one way to get things right.
You've probably heard some version of this, right? For decades, this little piece of wisdom was basically treated as fact. It pointed to this fundamental problem that economists thought was pretty much unsolvable, a dilemma that was just baked into who we are as self-interested people.
And this problem, well, it has a name, the commons dilemma. And it's this classic trap that societies have been falling into for centuries.
Okay, so let's really break this down. The tragedy of the commons basically argues that any shared resource, think of a community pasture for grazing cows, a fishing ground, or even the clean air we all breathe, is pretty much doomed. And why? Well, because every single person has an incentive to take as much as they can for themselves. The rational thing for one fisherman to do is to catch one more fish, right? But the problem is, when every fisherman makes that same rational choice, the whole fishery collapses, and then nobody wins. So, faced with this tragedy that seemed totally inevitable, economic theory really only gave us two ways out. Option 1, privatization. You just divide up the commons, give each piece to a private owner, and now they have a direct reason to take care of their little slice of property. Option 2, centralized state control. You have a big, top-down government authority come in and impose super strict rules on everybody. So it was either the market or the state, and for a long, long time those were seen as the only options on the table.
And that was pretty much the end of the story. A really simple, but also really limiting choice. But what if that whole framework was built on a shaky foundation? What if there was another solution, one that was hiding in plain sight the whole time?
And this is where everything changes. This is where a political scientist comes onto the scene, looks at this supposedly settled economic law, and causes what you could only call a great institutional rupture. She completely changed the rules of the game.
Meet Elinor Ostrom. In 2009, she became the very first woman to ever win the Nobel Prize in economic sciences. And get this, she didn't earn it by creating some super complex new math model. Nope, she did it by doing something that was actually kind of radical. She went out into the real world and just watched what people actually do.
So the heart of her challenge, and what the Nobel Committee pointed out, was that this whole tragedy of the commons idea, it wasn't a universal truth. It was just a theory based on what people might do in a lab or a thought experiment. Ostrom's research out in the field showed that again and again, real communities were successfully managing their shared stuff without a private owner or a big government telling them exactly what to do.
This was her crucial insight, her big discovery. Self-governance isn't just some fantasy. It's not only possible, it happens all the time. This was the architectural rupture. She showed that people aren't just helplessly trapped in these social dilemmas. They are totally capable of designing, monitoring, and enforcing their own rules to make things last. A true third way.
Now, to be specific, Ostrom's work focused on a certain type of thing she called common pool resources, and they have two key features. First, it's really hard to stop people from using them, and second, when one person uses the resource, it subtracts from what's available for everyone else.
And we're not talking about abstract ideas here. This is real, vital stuff. We're talking about the pastures in Switzerland, the forests in Nepal, the irrigation systems in Spain, and even the groundwater basins right under our feet in the United States. Ostrom studied hundreds of these real-world cases to figure out, what actually works and what doesn't.
But here's the best part. Ostrom didn't just say, hey, it's possible. She went way further. She actually identified the common ingredients in these successful, long-lasting systems. She basically created a set of design principles, a kind of toolkit for how communities can govern themselves sustainably.
So what did she find? Well, successful systems had a few things in common. First, you need really clear boundaries. Who's in the group and who's out? Second, the people who are actually using the resource have to be part of making the rules. I mean, that makes sense, right? You're way more likely to follow rules you helped create. Third, it has to be fair. The costs of keeping things running have to be proportional to the benefits people get. Fourth, you need monitoring. And a lot of the time, the users themselves are the best monitors. And if someone breaks a rule, you need sanctions that start small and get bigger for repeat offenses. Fifth, you've got to have cheap, easy ways to solve fights when they pop up. And finally, and this one is huge, the community's right to make its own rules has to be respected by outside authorities.
And all of this, it points to a much, much bigger idea. Ostrom's work wasn't really just about fish and treats. It was about a completely different way of thinking about how we govern ourselves, one that goes way beyond that simple, black-and-white debate of markets versus states. She gave it a name: polycentric governance. Now, I know it sounds a little academic, a little complicated, but the idea is actually super intuitive. Instead of having one single, all-powerful boss making every single decision from the top, a polycentric system has many different decision-making centers, and they all operate at different levels, from a tiny local user group all the way up to regional and national bodies.
Think about it less like a pyramid with a pharaoh at the top and more like an ecosystem. You've got all these overlapping circles of authority. The local users manage what's right in front of them, and then they coordinate with other local groups through, say, a regional council. And that council might in turn work with a national agency. It's a system that's flexible, it's adaptable, and it's way more resilient.
So in the end, what Ostrom's work really proved is that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Good governance isn't about finding the one right answer, picking the market or the state, and then trying to force it on everyone everywhere. It's about empowering communities to build a whole diversity of institutions that are actually tailored to the specific resource, and most importantly, to the people who depend on it. This was an absolute revolution for institutional economics. And that leaves us with a massive question for our world today. Ostrom showed us how local folks can solve their own local commons problems, but now we're facing truly global commons problems, like climate change. So can these lessons be scaled up? Can a bottom-up, polycentric approach that's built on trust and local rules actually help us govern our shared planet? That right there is the powerful and urgent legacy of Elinor Ostrom's work.